Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome back to Geezerology on YouTube. I'm Scott here in South Florida where it's starting to, summer's coming in. And I understand that up in Missouri where Bob is, that winter just doesn't want to leave.
Not quite. We're bouncing back and forth between cold and rainy and then sunny the next day. So, it's Missouri. If you don't like the weather, wait 5 minutes.
I'll take the cold and rainy over what we're in store for the next 6 months. Oh, yeah. Hot and rainy. Oh, that's worse.
Well, you're the one that wanted to live in the swamps.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about three debut albums that I hold close to my heart and in high esteem. And Bob will take his turn on that next week. Before we do, though, Bob, I want to talk to you about Jesus Christ Superstar, which you wrote about.
Okay.
At Geezerology.com this week. That was a surprise. That came out of nowhere. I had never ever listened to Jesus Christ Superstar. I knew of it. It was huge. It was a huge big thing when it came out. Was it 1972? I want to say
71. I think
71 was it?
Yeah.
Right. That was when I was that was before I graduated from high school, and I remember that it was the talk of the. It was the talk of the town. It was the talk of the country back then, both among rock and roll lovers, among Jesus lovers, among Jesus haters. Everybody was talking about this thing.
Yes, they were.
I had never listened to it. I had a couple friends I remember who bought it. I still remember it wasn't a traditional album cover. It was in a box where you lifted the lid off the box. It was an album shaped box. You lifted the lid off the box, and the records. There was two or three records. Two records, I guess.
Two records
were in that box. And I had never heard this thing before. I had heard a cut off of it. I Don't Know How to Love Him. I guess, there were a couple of songs that became singles, but I listened to this the other night, and I was just, what is going on here? How was this called a rock opera? There was nothing much rock. I mean, there were rock musicians who played on it, but these were basically all show tunes. There wasn't much rock going on here.
There was.
Maybe on a couple.
I mean, how do you define rock? Okay, I mean,
well, yeah, with a steady, with a steady. It's like pornography. I know it when I see it. I know it when I hear it. Right.
Right. Okay.
There were a couple of tracks on there that were in the rock genre, but to me it mostly just sounded like a bunch of show tunes. I don't know. I was surprised at how much more Broadway and how much less rock it was than I was expecting. Was this one of your go-to albums in the day?
Yes, it was. I played the heck out of that thing, and as I wrote in the piece, I to this day I can still quote verbatim sections out of it, and I like the music. I like the story that it told. It never really did anything to me spiritually. The mouth doesn't work today. But I really did like the music. I like the variety in it. And Ian Gillan, portrayed Christ on the album, and I think he's an incredible vocalist. Out of Deep Purple, Joe Cocker's Grease Band, did the rock music that was on it. So I really enjoyed it, and I played the heck out of it. And like I said in the thing, I even bought Now, did you listen to the original recording?
I love the first one, the one that came out in 1970.
Okay. Yeah. You know, and I even bought this, you know, the soundtrack from the movie, and I've seen at least 2 or 3 theatrical productions of it. You know, so yeah, I like it. I enjoy it.
Have you listened to it like recently, within the last couple of 3 weeks?
No, I think the last time that I listened to it was probably, maybe a couple of years ago in its entirety. But no, I didn't listen to it recently, other than, you know, looking for YouTube videos to play. So I did listen to
have a listen sometime this week, and then report back next week and let us know if you think it holds up or not.
Okay.
It just, yeah, I think probably the big problem is that with me hearing it for the first time just this week, it was probably it was probably a lot better in 1971 than it is now.
But then
that would be my guess, because you know, because I mean, I went into it with what, 50 years of sort of background knowledge, and you know, it was some sort of idea of what it was supposed to be, or what it was intended to be, I should say. That's a better word, what it was intended to be. And it didn't hold up to that at all for me. And I think probably more that because all this time has passed, and it just you know, time has passed it by.
well, then I will you may not know this about me, but I will also let you know that at one point I was a drama student. So, you know, I did 2 years of drama in high school, and the first 2 years of community college, I actually declared myself as a theater major.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an affinity for theater and things like that. So that had part of the appeal to me. And I switched majors once I realized that, one, I didn't have any acting talent. So it was not a viable career for me. It was just something that I toyed with because it sounded cool. So
You've got a face and a personality made for typewriters, right?
Exactly. Yes. I always said
that's just a joke. I couldn't
have a face for radio. So.
Yeah, I can understand how, if I would have heard this in 1971, it probably would have been a pretty profound. Where now there's not much profundity there. Like I say, it sounded more like Randy Rainbow than it did Deep Purple, you know. Bob, what's up? Anything with you?
Well, I read your latest Pandora Shuffle piece.
Oh yeah.
And you have some very eclectic tastes.
I just wrote about what Pandora threw at me for that 5.
Well, I know, but the Pandora is picking those based on your preferences, right? Or what it seems to be your preferences.
I spent a lot of years back in the day working those things, you know, liking songs and disliking songs, and you know, yeah.
Well, it's an interesting segue from Mott the Hoople and the Rolling Stones to Tears for Fears.
Yeah, Tears for Fears is one of those random things that, you know, it's like it pops up every now and then. What's is fine, you know. I don't mind listening to something like that every now and then. You know,
I'd have hit skip if Spotify has if that has a skip function. I'd have hit that right then.
No, there's not many. Somehow some soft, easy listening piano things got in there, and I spent a couple of weeks purging those things. I don't know how that happened. It must have been a misclick on my part that got those into my algorithm. And but other than that, no. The only things that I actively skip past are the two that I've mentioned before. Led Zeppelin and Bruce Springsteen. It's like, yeah, no, I don't want those. I don't.
Oh, what sacrilege, Scott. I mean, I have indulged you with Tom Waits and the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed, and you can't give me Zeppelin.
I've tried listen. I used to listen to Zeppelin in high school, and I was like, yeah, it was okay, but the problem is that they never go away. It's like every time you turn on a radio, they're playing a Led Zeppelin song. Every time when I started working on my Pandora stations, I kept trying to throw Led Zeppelin in my face. It's like, enough. I was never a big fan to begin with, you know. Yeah. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time.
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's talk about some debut albums. I chose three to talk about that I'm very fond of. I've been very fond of for a long time. There are a lot of debut albums that I could have chosen to talk about today, but I decided to go with three of them that are not only favorites of mine, but also that have sort of become bigger than themselves. You know, they're not just albums; they've become sort of these cultural touchstones. Two of them in particular. One of them on the other side of the pond, not so much in the United States as on the other side of the pond, but it found itself to me. But anyway, the first one I'm going to talk about, and this is not going to be no surprise to anybody, is that one.
I'm shocked.
Right?
Shocked, I say.
Oh, yeah. Let's get the glare off of that. Yeah. That is actually an original printing of that, and that cover has held up quite well, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
Especially considering how much you would have listened to that.
Yeah. And there's the gatefold with all the band members and some press reviews that they got back then. The Velvet Underground and Nico. Probably it's I don't have a whole lot to add to what's already out in the world about this, but it's probably one of the most highly regarded rock albums of all time. That it was, but it was largely ignored. Nobody bought it. Nobody paid attention about it. Nobody heard it until about 10 years after it was released. And it took Lou Reed getting together with David Bowie and recording Transformer before people started getting onto the Velvet Underground, because they heard of the Velvet Underground because that used to be Lou Reed's band, and that's really how Velvet Underground came into the mainstream. This was recorded, as you know, on the bottom there, and it says Andy Warhol, which probably was not the best way to market this album. Because it's like, because you see that in a record store and you go, what is that? Isn't Andy Warhol a painter? What is he playing guitar now? What? But Warhol was a producer of this album, and they say the extent of his work on this album was he put up the money. And he held the record companies and the producers at bay, and he sold it to record companies. That was pretty much his extent of it, of his production. Apparently, I've gone back and researched. Lou Reed and John Cale both have said that the real producer of this album was a guy named Tom Wilson, who a lot of you probably heard before. He he was everywhere back in those days. He produced a lot of Dylan albums. He produced the first 2 Velvet Underground albums, including this one. They say he doesn't get credit on this, but Reed and Cale say he did it. This album was recorded in spring of 1966. Actually, it was in May of 1966. On the same week, a piece of trivia for you, Bob. Trivia question: what other album was recorded on the same week as this album was recorded? Spring of 1966.
1966.
The Beatles' Revolver. This was
okay. I was just getting ready to say Revolver.
Revolver.
Yeah.
And it wasn't released until a year later, in March of '67, because they had a hard time selling it, getting a record company, finding a record company to release it, and then once they found a record company to release it, they had a problem with a lawsuit of somebody who was pictured on the original back cover. Somebody's picture was superimposed here. I'm backwards here, right over the top of Reed's head in that photo, and they had to recall everything and go back and redo that album cover. So that set it back another 3 or 4 months. There was some actor in the Warhol camp who got busted for drugs, and so he needed money for legal fees. So he decided that he might be able to get some money by suing them to get a settlement for using his picture. And they said, "Hell with you, we're not going to use your picture." Single. They released a single of All Tomorrow's Parties in July 1966, which was one of the 3 songs that Nico sang a lead on. That single went nowhere in July of '66. They went back, and once they finally got Verve, which is a subsidiary of MGM, they got Verve to go ahead and release it in November of '66. Wilson took the band in to the studio to record another song to release as a single, Sunday Morning, which was released as a single, which actually turned out to be the first opening track on this album. That went nowhere. This album was released, and then they released the album in March 1967. It went nowhere. But put this in its time. March of 1967 is released. It was recorded in April of 1966, and you know some of these songs, but think about that for a minute. Some of these songs that were being recorded in March of 1966. I'm Waiting for the Man, talking about a guy going uptown to buy some drugs. The Black Angels' Dust Song, sadomasochistic sex, very explicitly. Kiss the Boots of Shiny Leather, throwing whips around, and then the centerpiece of this, Heroin, which is a pretty graphic description of what happens to somebody, both with the lyrics and with the music, with the help of John Cale's screeching violin. A graphic description of what happens to somebody when they're shooting heroin into their veins. Recording this in spring of 1966. What record company's got to release that stuff?
Especially
and again, what member of the record buying public is going to buy this stuff?
Especially in '67, which was the summer of love.
Right. Whenever I think about it, especially putting that in its time, it was really incredible what these people were doing then. And it was way ahead of its time, and we know that because it took 10, 15 years before people started becoming aware of this album. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you knew, I mean, it was showing up on all of these greatest album of all time list, not even showing up on a list, but everybody was putting it in their top 5 or 10. lot of things came from this. So this is David Bowie started his career when he heard this stuff. All and really all the stuff that was happening in London at the time and in England at the time with glam rock, and with the later emergence of punk, everything like that. That pretty much came from here. That's where all this started. It was incredible stuff. Bob, have you ever listened to this all the way through?
No, I've listened to some of the songs off of it, but I've never listened to the entire album.
Yeah. Anyway, that I don't know. Probably in the post-British invasion rock era, anyway, probably the most profound and impactful album in the rock and roll era, I would say. I can't think of anything that would top that.
So could you draw a direct line from the VU debut to, say, Sex Pistols?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, with all the it wasn't, but it was just because of the drumming on this is so primitive. It's just basically Maureen Tucker just banging, with mallets banging on bass drums and tom toms. There's no snare drums. There's no drum set. There's a lot of John Cale just banging on a piano, and then Cale with his screechy viola. There's a lot of dissonance and there's a lot of dissonance here, even more so on the second album, White Light, White Heat. Probably White Light, White Heat, which was the second album, was probably more direct lineage to the punk movement than this was, but this was the beginning of it. They took some of the more abrasive and discordant things that they did here and turned it into an album called White Light, White Heat, which was their second album. And that's pretty much the genesis of punk. This is probably you can definitely draw a direct line from this to the glam movement that pretty much started with Bowie and T-Rex and one of the other bands that we'll get to later. Bob, anything to
add? Yeah, two questions, or actually maybe a comment and a question. I can see the connection to punk. I'm not quite seeing the connection to glam. And then secondly, Lou Reed, who was, I'm assuming, probably the author of most of these songs and the driving force behind the group. So did he move away from this sound because he repudiated it, or did he move away from it because he recognized that there wasn't much commercial viability to it at the time?
He moved further into it before he moved away to.
Oh, he did?
Well, yeah, White Light, White Heat.
Okay. Well, I guess I was talking more about his solo career.
Yeah, and that I mean, obviously that was there's a lot of that was Reed wrote most of the material here, but the layers of weirdness came from Cale. Cale is a classically trained musician, and he was a student of the Lamont Young school of music that it was very experimental. A lot of drones and a lot of discordant atonal layers on top of structured songs. And he was a student of that, and that's what he brought to the table. When he left after White Light, White Heat, that's when all of a sudden the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed took this sharp right turn towards more mainstream, uh, uh, more mainstream rock and roll and music. Uh, there are a couple of tunes on here that are just straight up rock and roll uh, that got Mark Bolan and David Bowie interested. A couple of Nico songs, Femme Fatale, There She Goes Again, I'll Be Your Mirror, the opening half of European Sun. I mean, about half of these tracks are just pretty much straight on rock and roll with just odd sounds added to them. Yeah. Okay. One more question, or should I move on?
You can move on.
Okay. The next one, I do not have a copy of this, so I've dropped it right there. Bob, what do you think of that one? That's right there at the bottom of your screen.
Actually, there's nothing there at the bottom of my screen.
There's nothing
No.
there. Okay,
There's nothing there.
Work with me.
Okay.
Work with me. Bam! Do you see it now?
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Oh yeah, that
one. Okay.
This one's probably going to surprise my old friend Bob. He probably didn't hear this one. This one created a whole genre. You know, forget the blood rock, forget the Grand Funk and all these others. Heavy metal started with this album right here, Black Sabbath's debut album.
You surprised me.
Do you have before I go on? I mean, is that would you agree or disagree with that statement?
Oh, I agree with it wholeheartedly.
Okay, yeah,
absolutely.
You go back and I say, well, they talk about the blood rock and the Grand Funk, and well, what about Vanilla Fudge? And no. It all starts right here, Black Sabbath. This is not an album. It's never been one that I've listened to a lot, but and I'm not a heavy metal fan, never have been much of a heavy metal fan, but I heard this album when it first came out again in 1970. February 1970 is when it was released. And I heard this when it first came out. A friend of mine, when we were sitting around having our little Friday night Boone's Farm and doobie parties in somebody's bedroom, they put this on and I was shocked. Like, where did this come from? What planet did this come from? I've never heard anything like this before. And I've gone back, I've done research, I've gone back and listened to other things. I've never heard anything like this. Even Black Sabbath never did anything like this again. Excuse me. I mean, just the album cover, this is the whole package. This is one that's a whole package. That album cover is more than any other album cover that I can think of off the top of my head, tells you exactly what this is. And when you put the stylus on at the beginning of the record, you're hearing exactly what you see on that album cover. No, I mean it's like, now it's like now I look at that album cover now, and it always puts me in mind of these found footage horror movies that have become so in fashion since the Blair Witch Project. In fact, I watched one the other night, and I enjoy the hell out of those things. When I just want to turn my brain off and watch a movie, I watch one of those found footage horror movies. I think they're great. Anyway, but that's what this album cover looks like. It looks like a still shot from one of those things. This says this album just comes from the bowels of hell. Your piece that you wrote about Jesus Christ Superstar, about how your preacher was all up in arms about it. And I remember when the Southern Baptists and the Assemblies of God, they were all up in arms about the sacrilege and everything like that. If those people would have been paying attention, if they would have listened to the Black Sabbath album, it would have scared the living hell out of them.
Amen.
Am I right?
Yes.
But this one got past them. They didn't hear it. I mean, and I listened to this 3 or 4 times in the past week, just getting ready for this, and I still find this album a brilliant piece of work. Again, it's not something that I have regularly listened to over the years. I didn't I didn't move with the heavy metal movement, but even though heavy metal has never gone away, I mean, it's moved off into 4 or 5 different directions, or more than that. You moved into death metal, you moved into prog metal, heavy metal, and all that, but it all starts right here. I mean, I don't think you can point anywhere else to say where this started. And I don't know, and the thought occurred to me the other day, maybe why I never became a heavy metal fan is because even though I love this album, even though I found this album so profound, I don't think I've ever heard anybody do it better than how it was done in this album. Tony Iommi is all over this with his weird, snaky, evil lead guitar lines. Ozzy's voice is incredible. I mean, it's a perfect. Ozzy's voice is perfect for this music. Tony Iommi's guitar is perfect for this music and this message. The bass and the drums, Geezer Butler and Bill Ward are just they're just solid. They're just solid underneath what Iommi and Ozzy are doing. I did read that this was actually a successful album. It hit number 23 on a Billboard 200, which surprised me a little bit because this was such a scary, odd piece of work that I was surprised when I just realized how successful that was. Now, and I say people who are heavy metal fans and who are Black Sabbath fans will rate some of their later albums, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Volume 4. They rate those higher than this album, but I don't see it. It's like after this, everything Black Sabbath did to me paled in comparison to this album. Again, I'm not a fan, so I'm not a real student of it, but I don't see it. This was a pinnacle of heavy metal to me, to a non-student and a non-real fan of it. But this is a pinnacle to me, and I've never heard it done better. It was recorded in one day, 12 hours. It took them 12 hours.
Seriously?
Yes. No overdubs. Everything was just straight to tape. The only overdubs were at the beginning of the album with the thunder and rain sound effects. That was the only overdubs they did. Ozzy said that they went in early in the morning, got this done in 12 hours, and they got to the pub in time for last call. Bob, do you have anything to add about Black Sabbath?
Yeah, I got a couple things. I, like you, I'm not a real heavy metal fan. There's some Black Sabbath stuff out there I like. Paranoid, which was their most accessible album, things like that. But I do recognize that Black Sabbath started a genre that is still going strong today. And I think Judas Priest, all of those heavy metal bands that follow need to bow down to their satanic majesties here. And prior to the pandemic shutting everything down, we always had a huge heavy metal festival here in Kansas City down at the Liberty Memorial, which just drew untold numbers of people. And I've encountered a lot of people that are heavy metal fanatics that just surprised me. You know, I mean, they're successful people that you would, and I mean, I've known them that have gone on heavy metal cruises and all of these things. So it's a genre that has not died away. It's still got a lot of fans.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, whether you like heavy metal or not, you absolutely have to recognize Black Sabbath for kicking the whole thing off.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. And anybody who's a true heavy metal fan, I'd still argue with them about that. I mean, there was nothing came before this that prepared anybody for this. Honest to God, it was quite a profound record.
And even though Steppenwolf had heavy metal, the term heavy metal in Born to Be Wild,
they're credited with being
they were not a heavy metal
band. They were
band.
not heavy metal.
No, they were a rock and roll band.
Yeah.
And I mean, John Kay, when he went solo, did country music, so they're not heavy metal.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I was a big Steppenwolf fan back in the day.
Yeah, I was too.
Yeah. Okay, number three. The first Roxy Music album.
That doesn't surprise me. Well, I guess it does a little bit.
This was originally, this is not a first edition copy, so I don't have the gatefold copy. They issued a gatefold copy in Britain, but when they released this in the United States, they just made it a single sleeve. So, but it opened up. There was a back, and then which is a shame. And I'll go ahead and dig up a picture of it. In fact, I have dug up a picture of it, and I put it right there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Can you see that, Bob? Right
yes.
there?
Yeah.
That picture right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that? What's your reaction to that?
It's different. I guess that wasn't the only time that they had issues with covers.
No, I'll drop the picture. The gatefold of this album cover had as much to do with the impact of this album as the music did. And it's too bad we didn't get that in the United States. We've gotten it since then, but what that pretty much what that was, that pretty much set the whole fashion sense of what was going on in the clubs and even spilled out in the streets in England pretty much for a lot of the 70s and into the 80s. And that's where the look of glam started right there. That's where it started. That's where all the Boy George stuff in the 80s, that's where all that started right there. Musically, this was released on the same day as Bowie's Ziggy Stardust album. So there's always been this debate on which of these is the first glam album. Well, they were released on the same day. The difference here is this is much more complex music than what Bowie threw out there. Bowie and T-Rex pretty much was just straight rock and roll. This Roxy Music, this particular album, this is pretty much straight rock and roll. What happened before that with just a lot of chaos and a lot of weird Brian Eno noise effects layered on top of the straight rock and roll. And this actually, Brian Eno was to Brian Ferry what John Cale was to Lou Reed. Ferry wrote all the songs, and Eno made the songs into something that are just otherworldly. And I don't know if you know much about Brian Eno, Bob, but he's still around. He's still working, but he created that whole genre of ambient music became big, and into and that's and Brian Eno is where like a lot of new wave came from. Not new wave, a lot of new age, all the new age atmospheric things that were happening in the 80s and into the 90s, post rock. Uh, uh, what do they call it? I can't think of what I'm thinking. What I'm worried about. But anyway, this is not my favorite Roxy Music album. It's a little out there. It's a little experimental. Some of the experiments don't work. About half of the tracks on this album are fabulous or fantastic. I love. About half the tracks on here are, yeah, I could live without them. It's just a little too much Eno going on here. And Eno's not credited as a musician on this album. Eno is credited with treatments, and what he did, he had this contraption, and I mean, this just wasn't studio stuff that he did. I mean, he took this big contraption on stage with him. It was basically a combination soundboard and synthesizer, and all of the instruments, especially the lead guitar, Ferry's vocals, Andy Mackey's saxophone, were all pushed through this machine that Eno had, and he would just put these just really odd filters on them, but that's just otherworldly stuff. These burning guitar solos would just have these odd, weird sounds to them that were unexplainable until you learn that that's because they're going through Eno's filter on his soundboards. Roxy, again, like the Velvet Underground, Roxy recorded 2 albums with Eno. Eno and Brian Ferry got to a point where they were trying to go in 2 different directions. Eno left the band, and Roxy Music then became fully Brian Ferry's band. I actually like the 3 albums in the 70s that Roxy Music produced after Eno left more than I liked the first 2 albums with Eno. But there's no question that these things were quite profound in their day. A lot of the stuff you've heard a lot of this since then, but actually most of the stuff you've heard since then are studio effects and take staffers in the studio. This is actually Eno doing this stuff live, which is incredible. Good rock and roll music here. Some good rock and roll music with Andy Mackey's saxophone, Phil Manzanera, wonderful guitarist. Thompson, what's his first name? Paul Thompson, a drummer, one of the best drummers around. And you have Brian Ferry. We all know about Brian Ferry, who back in the day, back in these early Roxy Music days, was quite an innovative singer, a very good songwriter, good innovative, good artist. It was only later that all of a sudden he became Mr. Adult contemporary crooner, and I call Roxy Music broke up after their 5th album, Siren, in about 77. They all went their separate ways. They reformed about 79 and made 3 more albums, which turned out to be their most successful albums, especially Avalon, which Avalon gets all this. But I call that reformed Roxy Music stuff. I mean, that's now just strictly Brian Ferry being adult contemporary crooner. I call it Roxy Music. It just sounds like elevator music to me. Just this soft atmospheric stuff that I wasn't a big fan of. But the first 5 Roxy Music albums, which all started here, great stuff, and they had a profound influence on what happened with pop in the 80s, especially on the other side of the pond, which in the 80s, that stuff coming over here, and MTV, they became big on MTV. well, all that synth pop stuff in the 80s, it kind of started here.
Hmm.
That's where that comes from. Bob, anything to
Yes.
add?
Yeah, I got some things. Love is the Drug. Where does that fit in?
That was on the 5th Roxy Music album, Siren. That was actually their first hit in the United States. That was about 76. I'd have to.
Was it that long ago?
Yeah, yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that was the 5th Roxy Music album, which was the last album. A kid named Eddie Jobson replaced Eno in the band, and they recorded 3 albums with Jobson, which those 3 albums I think were the peak of Roxy music. They're really good. Yeah,
Well,
that was on the 5th album, Siren,
okay.
which was the one with Jerry Hall in the mermaid costume, with a blue tent on.
Wasn't that one of their other controversial album covers? Or am I thinking of a different one?
Well, that wasn't so. I mean, all of their album covers were these high glamour, off weird shots. That was one of them. No, the most controversial one was Country Life, which is two essentially naked girls standing in front of a bunch of vegetation, which in the United States they photoshopped the girls out, and so the cover of the album, the first time they released in the United States, was just a bunch of green vegetation on the cover.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So, well, I've learned some things because for some reason I was putting Love is the Drug into the 80s for some reason.
No, I
don't know why.
That was a fairly, that was Roxy Music pulling back from their excesses. It was still pretty good, but that was their 5th album, Siren, in '76, which it was their first hit in the United States, and that was sort of the first turn that Brian Ferry started taking towards just mainstream, general adult contemporary sort of stuff.
So I know who Roxy Music is, and I know about the thing with the album covers and stuff. And the only song that I would probably recognize as a Roxy Music song is "Love Is the Drug," only because of the radio airplay that it got.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that I've learned. One, I didn't know that they dated back that far into the early '70s. I for some reason I was thinking they were a much later band.
Yeah, this was I don't know if this was released in it was recorded in March of '72 and released in June of '72.
Yeah, so I always thought Roxy Music was like a late '70s, '80s band. And for some reason I was in my mind.
That's when they became popular in the United States. The turn of the '80s, that last 3 reformed Roxy Music, 80, I'm not sure of the dates. It was like between '79 and '82. Avalon, which was our last album, was probably about '82. That was our biggest selling album here, and that was their most successful album. But that was, again, that was just a shell of Roxy Music, which was basically, they were just by then a backing band for Brian Ferry, who had already by then embarked on a solo career, and was just moving into crooning old standards territory.
Right. Well, I'm going to have to go back and check out the early stuff then, because this is something for whatever reason, I'm ashamed to admit that I was just absolutely unaware of that early history.
I actually think that I don't know if you'd like that one too much. That, like I say, that one gets a little out there. So does the second one with one of those 3 middle period Roxys with Eddie Jobson. Either one of those 3, I think you might find at least enjoyable, if not love them. We'll talk about that later. Maybe that'll be your next listening.
My next listening challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of off topic, but just out of curiosity, Love Is the Drug, was that a parody of disco, or was that truly an attempt to be a disco song?
No, it wasn't an attempt to be a disco song. I don't know if it was parody of disco, but it was. I think it was probably intentionally derivative of disco. It's definitely a Roxy Music song. I mean, there's no all of a sudden, Roxy Music didn't all of a sudden become a disco band for that one song. I mean, it's definitely a Roxy Music song. It has a Roxy Music elements in it, but it's just a disco layered Roxy Music song. Okay. It's not real typical of anything else that they did. It was a song they made to try to make a hit. and it worked.
I just remember I think there were lyrics like limbo up, limbo down, and then something about the disco floor. So,
yeah. Oh yeah.
It's not a song that I would listen to. I mean, it's not a song I would want to own, but it was just all over the radio, so it was impossible, not to hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a little guilty. I mean, if it comes on the radio, I kind of turn the volume up because it's a guilty pleasure, but that's legitimately, that's the only thing I know about Roxy Music. So I will have to go back and check this out.
You're real hardcore Roxy Music fans, especially the ones who are more all about the Eno era than the Jobson era. They will point to Love Is the Drug as the jump the shark moment for Roxy Music.
So it's Roxy Music's loaded version.
I don't agree with that, but a lot of the hardcores will say that. I don't agree with that. Their jump the shark moment came a couple on the next album, but a couple of years later after they broke up and reformed. They should have just stayed dissolved and it just should have been a Brian Ferry solo project, Okay, so Bob's going to come at us next week with 3 of his favorite debut albums, and I'm pretty sure I know what one of them is going to be. Just like he pretty much knew what my first one is going to be. I think I know which one of his first ones is going to be.
You may be making me rethink my other 2 choices now.
I would have if I made a conscious decision to clear a path for Bob to do that one. I probably would have done it if I didn't know that Bob actually likes that particular album more than I do. So I decided just to leave that alone and let him have it. And if you haven't figured it out by now, you come back next week and figure out what it is you're talking about.
It should be pretty obvious. But this top 3 debut album thing, I've gone all over the place on it, and I've vacillated between things that I like personally as opposed to, well, I don't necessarily like this, but I understand its importance. And you picking Black Sabbath is a classic example. I never would have thought that would have been one you pick, and I wouldn't have picked it. But after you did, I sat there and went, you can't deny the impact it had.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, as coming out with something that was new and different and impactful, you can't deny what it did. Right. So I may go back and rethink. I may move more from, the one I'm absolutely going to do, it's an all-time personal favorite, but you also have to acknowledge the impact that it had.
Yeah. I was going for the profundity factor.
Yeah. So I'm going to rethink.
I mean, all these three albums that I mentioned were just profound. Not only profound for me. I mean, this debut Roxy Music album is not the first Roxy Music that I heard. The debut Velvet Underground album is the first Velvet Underground that I heard, but not the first Lou Reed I heard. I got there with Transformer. That's what got me there. Black Sabbath. That was. I distinctly remember the time I first heard that album. It just went wow. It's not one that's always been close to my heart because it's not. It's not my favorite genre of music, but it's one that I've always, from the first day I heard it, just thought it was just a work of genius. It was genius. It was so profound. So, yeah, I mean, it started a whole lot of things that 50 years later, there's still the direct line can be drawn right to it. Okay, so there was one I actually considered one. It was actually kind of a profound album. I was thinking of, and I mentioned it last week, the Go-Go's, because I saw that, and the Go-Go's somebody I never listened to, and but I saw that I saw the documentary on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or something a month or so ago. I just sat down and watched the documentary on the Go-Go's, and really enjoyed it. Then I went back and listened to that album. You know, it was like, you know, the first all-female band who had a #1 album, you know, basically. So, you know, so there was some impact there on that one. And I listened to it, that album. I thought, you know what, this is pretty good. It's a pretty good rock and roll album.
It
you
is.
know
It's
something?
in my
So then I brought it up last week, I think, in our video last week.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminded me of that. So I thought, you know what, I want to go, you know, I decided to go do a little research and have a listen to that album again, you know, and consider it for this. And I listened to that album again this week, and that was the second time I've listened to it now. And I realized that, well, you know, it's okay, but it's not as good as I thought it was the first time I heard it. There was more cultural impact there than there was actually good music there, I think. But anyway, that's an aside. So next week, come on back next week. Bob's going to tell you about 3 more debut albums. Bob, anything else we want to talk about in closing?
Let's see. Well, I stumbled across last week an interesting story. It's the first I'd ever heard of it, and I'm going to putting something together to write about it for the blog. But it's a deal where they're using Google's artificial intelligence to write music and lyrics for songs, and they're feeding music from classic artists and into the computer. And then the AI program is analyzing all of that and taking that information and then creating material that sounds like it was done by these original performers. And it's kind of an interesting thing, and especially why they're doing it. So I'm going to write about that.
That should be an interesting read. You're going to have to do me some convincing whether the music will be interesting or not. But
well, unfortunately, I haven't been able to listen to any of it. It's on one of the streaming services that I don't subscribe to. So all I've been able to hear is just like 30-second snippets.
Oh, is it on Spotify?
Yeah. I think it's Spotify. And so I that's all I've been able to find. So I don't know if you need to be an actual subscriber to Spotify to hear the full length versions. What I've seen so far is just the one where you can do like a 30-second.
I think with Spotify you can unless it's changed. It used to be, or if you have a free Spotify account, you could still listen to stuff on Spotify. It'll just throw an ad in between songs.
Well, I'll let part of the cat out of the bag. The most recent one they've done is Nirvana. And you would easily recognize it as a Nirvana number.
Really?
Yeah, and well, when they recorded the song, they got a singer from a Nirvana tribute band, who sounds pretty close to Kurt Cobain, so that helped a lot. But that's, the others, I don't know if you would immediately recognize it or not, but the Nirvana one, it's pretty close. So, but it's kind of an interesting thing, and I'm still compiling information on it, but it kind of fascinated me.
Okay, I can't wait to read this, and yeah, once we get it together, then we'll go through and figure out how we can listen to this, and see if we can maybe get it. I have, since I have a premium Spotify account, I can help you out by putting together a playlist of this stuff and dropping it on the website.
Well, I've seen a link to, they've done 4 songs, and I have the link to where you can play snippets of all 4 of them, but I haven't gone to Spotify yet to see if it's something that, a casual Spotify user can get to, or whether you actually have to be a premium person. And I know it may be available on other streaming services. Like I say, I've just started my research, and I've been compiling several different news articles about the project.
Okay.
So I'll probably have something up on it in a few days' time.
Okay, excellent. Can't wait to see that. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Geezerology.com, read our blog. Come on back next week for another exciting episode of Geezerology on YouTube.
All right. Thank you very much.